This video is sponsored by Only Crits. What the hell was that? What just happened? Who was that?
I don't know, but I can find out.
Previously on Super Geek Mike.
I told you to delete your channel.
Well, that didn't help. I remember that part.
This is kind of like D&D, huh?
What?
You know how at the beginning of a D&D game, your players might not remember what happened in the last session, and so as the game master, you start the game by reminding them what had just happened? And since we're filming right now, maybe you could talk about that. Like, what's the best way to refresh your players' memories about what just happened in the game?
Oddwick, we're dealing with something life and death. This is not the time to talk about D&D. And besides, just reminding your players about what happened at the end of the last game isn't going to do any good.
Oh, do tell.
Well, okay, here's the thing. Obviously, it depends on your players and what they remember from each game and how well they take notes and how often you play. But when you start a new session, it's useful to give them some sort of recap to help them remember where you left off. And you could just recap the very last thing that happened. And sometimes that's enough. When we last left our heroes, the three of you were in the tavern, and the old man at the end of the bar had just transformed into a dragon and torn the building down around you. When we pick up the new game, you're all still pinned under the rubble and you can hear him roaring somewhere nearby. What do? And if the end of the last game was really, really dynamic and memorable, this might give them all the information they need. However, like I said, your mileage may vary, but I honestly think it is extremely rare for the end of a session to literally tell your players everything they need to know about the session they just jumped into. For example, maybe they don't remember why they were talking to the old man. If he's a total stranger and there was no ramp up, then you're probably fine. There's not a lot to recap. Last time, some dude turned into a dragon. That was super weird. Anyway, go. On the flip side, if instead the old man is an NPC they all know really, really well, and he's appeared in several sessions, and you know they all intimately remember exactly why they were talking to him and why he got upset, and so the dragon twist was a big deal, if all that is the case, then yeah, you likely don't need to do a lot of recapping. But between those two extremes is a huge gulf where I would estimate at least 80% of our D&D games actually land. Even if your players are good at taking notes and generally are pretty good at keeping track of the overall plots in your game, and that's kind of a huge hypothetical, but whatever, supposing that's the case, then it would still probably be really useful to remind your players what was going on more broadly in the campaign. Otherwise, you might find your players going to end up asking a lot of clarifying questions throughout the session, and that will just slow the game down and pull everybody out of the story. For example, you might have the old man turned dragon say something like, "I knew Angela would figure it out eventually." And your players might say, "Wait, what? What did Angela have to do with this?" And then you stop, and you wait to see if any of your other players are going to chime in, because they remember, but you're just getting a lot of blank faces. So you say, "Well, Angela told you that you couldn't trust this guy. That's why they sent you here to confront him with the notebook." And then someone else says, "Wait, what notebook are we talking about?" You sigh and say, "Well, the notebook was something that you found at the scene of the king's murder," and so on. You get the idea. You could wind up facing a series of questions that could have been easily answered if you'd given your players a more comprehensive recap at the start of the session. And of course, all of this assumes your players were even present at the last game. Some of them might have missed the last session. So for them, they might truly have no context for how the game is opening. So for those players, you really can't just leave it at one or two sentences that just set the scene for where you last left off. You have to have a more comprehensive recap anyway. And my suggestion would be, you should just offer a more comprehensive recap all the time anyway. It's just better for all players. Anyway, video over. Oddwick, can you please give me a more comprehensive recap?
Sure thing.
Previously on Super Geek Mike.
What the hell? And while you're down there, make sure to like and subscribe and sign up for my newsletter.
I told you to delete your channel.
Yeah, I remember some of that. I still don't feel like that's giving me the full picture of what just happened, though.
Well, do you have any advice for what makes a good recap?
Well, Obviously, you want to make sure that your audience, your players when you're running D&D for example, you want to make sure that they have enough information for them to actually remember what was going on and have the context necessary to follow along with the adventure. At the beginning of any episode of Critical Role, Matt Mercer will lay out a little recap of not just the immediate events of the last episode, but also the specific story arc they were in the middle of. That way, on the off chance the players have forgotten that the reason they went to the Plane of Fire was to get a suit of armor for Pike, Matt can give them that context right at the beginning of the session. Now, his players are generally pretty good at taking notes and generally really well immersed in the story overall, so it's not very often that they completely forget that they're tracking down magic items to fight dragons that have taken over the country, for example. But obviously, Matt's recaps are also there to help the audience get caught up. Still, Matt tends to have above average players as far as how they follow the story from session to session and how well they remember details of every game. Certainly, his players have far better memories for what happens in every game that they play in than I do for what happens in the games I play in or run. So speaking personally, I would find Matt's recaps really, really useful. It's helpful to remind your players of the connective tissue that ties this current adventure into the broader storyline they're currently playing through. However, generally speaking, when you're running a game of D&D, your players want to get through the recap as quickly as possible and get into the session itself. The same way when you're watching a TV show and there's a previously on at the beginning, you don't want that segment of the episode to take too long. One thing I noticed when I was binging all of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes earlier this year was that anytime an episode opened with a recap, the background music for those recaps was just an instrumental version of the show's opening titles. And because they always use the exact same music track for every recap, all the clips they use have to fit into a runtime of about 1 minute maximum. Now, I don't think you need to restrict your recaps to only 1 minute. A TV show has the advantage of using clips, whereas we are probably going to offer something a little bit more like a Star Wars opening crawl. We probably aren't going to reference specific lines of dialogue because we're just trying to paint a picture for the current scenario and make sure everybody knows what the main characters are in the middle of. And honestly, a Star Wars opening crawl might actually be the perfect template for how you should write your own recaps. At first, 3 paragraphs of recap kind of feels like a lot to me, but each of those paragraphs is like 2 or 3 sentences long. You can definitely aim for that as a very reasonable goal for just recapping the information your players need to remember so they can play the game. If you can't give all the information they need in 9 sentences, you need to seriously cut down on the information you think is vital for your players to understand the story. And that might actually mean you need to start writing simpler stories. Now, it's actually pretty difficult to learn how to recap a D&D session from watching TV shows because those recaps are just structured differently. Unless you're recording your session and actually editing the clips of it to play for your players before each game, which I have done before, but only when I was a player in an actual play show and only for our most elaborate and lore-heavy seasons. But outside of that very specific example, most recaps don't look anything like what we can replicate at the table. Unless, of course, you look at a TV show where the recaps are handled by a narrator. Some good examples of this are The Legend of Korra and Star Wars The Clone Wars. Both of them have a narrator who's basically trying to replicate the feeling of an old newsreel.
Benders be on alert! After coming face to face with Amon, leader of the Equalists, Avatar Korra discovers a terrifying truth. This masked madman has the ability to take away a person's bending.
The clone Starfleet is under siege. Dozens of Republic warships have been destroyed in merciless surprise attacks that leave no survivors.
Although, I do have to say, some of those recaps for the Clone Wars don't actually have anything to do with the episode that came before. The Clone Wars is an anthology show with rotating lead characters, so a new storyline might begin with a recap, catching us up with what the characters are dealing with, even though that's not something that's been shown in the show so far. Of course, that actually does kind of make it a faithful adaptation of Star Wars, since every one of those opening crawls gives the audience information they didn't have before. So you could use a recap-style format to not just recap previous sessions and remind your players of the mission they're in the middle of, but you can also use this format to start new story arcs. Come to think of it, The Legend of Korra did the same thing at the beginning of a new season, whenever they launched into a new story arc.
6 months ago, Avatar Korra defeated Amon and the Equalists. Since then, the council was disbanded, and the United Republic elected its first president. Tenzin's brother, Commander Boomy, retired and moved to Air Temple Island. And Korra and her boyfriend, Mako, have been the talk of the town. Peace has come to Republic City, but unbeknownst to the Avatar, danger now threatens the Southern Water Tribe.
I just ran my first game in the Avatar Legends system, and since it took place in the Korra era, I basically did the same thing. I wrote a few sentences to summarize the new status quo of Republic City after the finale of the show, and ended with a note about how the characters were being called in to help Asami with a favor. Then, when the game began, I put on some jazzy 1920s style music and threw on my best radio announcer voice, and read my players a very short introduction that set the scene, refreshed their memory about how the show ended 11 years ago, and also segued into the actual adventure. Now, while we're on the subject of recaps, including information the players might have forgotten or might not have ever had access to, That's kind of one of the biggest criticisms of previously on segments of TV shows. When almost every episode opens by recapping the last few episodes of the show, and then you get one episode that opens by showing you a scene from 4 seasons earlier of a character we haven't seen in literally years, that can serve as a pretty big spoiler. Oh, we're seeing a death scene from 3 seasons ago? Okay, it'll either be plot relevant for the first time in years, or I'm going to take a guess that he didn't die after all and that character's going to pop up again in this episode. It's just one of the necessary evils of a TV recap segment. They don't want the audience to be confused when some major dramatic reveal happens in case new viewers are watching or old viewers don't remember the context, so they have to include the clips in the recap that will essentially spoil that surprise in order to make sure the episode has the intended emotional reaction from the audience. Well, besides surprise, since that's out the window. The interesting thing is, I don't necessarily know how you would even replicate that problem in a D&D game. There isn't even really a seamless way to integrate reminders about old adventures into your recap without making it very obvious what you're doing, so I would just avoid that temptation overall. If you do need the players to remember a specific adventure or character from a previous session, the answer isn't to clumsily shove a reminder into your recap. It's actually probably better to just work that into the narrative itself. We actually talked about this in an episode of Critical Role Demystified where I broke down how Matt did this very thing. He wanted his players to remember that time they found themselves in a dragon's lair, so he introduced a subplot that would bring these characters back to that same lair. It essentially acted as a recap for very old events from the campaign that were going to be relevant again soon, but it was actually integrated into the session itself in a really smart way. Still, it is possible you could use your introductory recap to give the characters some exposition they had never received before, as long as you're pairing it with a time jump like we saw in The Legend of Korra in Star Wars. But in this case, hey Odwick?
Yeah?
I know there's something I'm missing about this masked guy who just showed up. There's something I didn't see. In this analogy, you could pretend that I'm a player who missed a session, because I'm definitely missing some important context. So I want you to show me a recap that covers everything that I missed. Everything that's actually relevant to what's going on.
Yeah, of course.
Previously on Super Geek Mike.
Soon.
There's going to be a lot of Critical Role videos coming in the next few weeks, so I hope you're ready for them.
Not this time. I told you to delete your channel.
That was some pretty important context, Odwick.
Yeah. You know, since we're talking about how TV shows do things, maybe it's time for a commercial break. What do you say? Do you want to read an ad?
Tell you what, Odwick, I'm actually having a hard time thinking about anything besides the masked guy who just broke into my house and shot at me. I'm having a little difficulty also coming up with a seamless transition for a sponsor to talk about their goods and services, so why don't you just cut to a commercial? You've done that before, you can do that again, right?
Sure, I'm happy to help. Hello, it's me, Winnie the Pooh. You know me as a beloved character of your childhood. Or as a deranged killer in a couple of low-budget horror movies. But what you probably don't know about me is that I love tabletop role-playing games, which is why I wanted to tell you about today's sponsor, Only Crits. Only Crits is a wonderful dice company that makes beautiful dice. They've got sharp-edged dice that look like they've got stars in them, and metal dice that look like chains or dragon scales, and gemstone dice that look like they were plucked right out of the ground, they do. Only Crits is a Canadian company, and if you've been keeping up with what the old colonies have been up to, you know they've created quite a row with their neighbors to the north. So why don't you show Canada some love and support a small business? Plus, each set of dice you buy comes with a free digital adventure. And I love rolling these dice. They're just fun to roll. Watch! And if you visit onlycrits.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you'll save 12% off of your order. Plus, another share of the sale goes towards supporting Mike. He's a good egg, he is. Once again, that's onlycrits.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to Only Crits for sponsoring this video. Cheerio! Thanks, Odwick. And you know what? I'm ready to talk about more D&D stuff. That's great.
The truth is, for the most part, I haven't been providing my own recaps to my players for most of my games for several years now. Instead, I've been asking the players to do the recaps for me. This is something Matt Colville has talked about on his own channel, and I know other DMs in my real life who aren't really plugged into the online scene like I am, but who do the same thing for a lot of the same reasons. The argument behind having your players do the recaps themselves is that it essentially teaches them to keep track of what's going on, and encourages them to take notes. If they know that you aren't going to bail them out by reminding them what's going on at the top of every session, then it's possible it will actually lead them to being much more diligent about their own responsibility to stay engaged with the story. And the other major benefit of having the players do the recaps themselves is that you're going to find out what is important to them. Which parts of the previous sessions do they remember? Is there a reason they can't recall exactly what happened in the last session? Is it because they weren't paying attention? Or because the adventure itself is not that memorable? Do their recaps linger on certain scenes or characters that really stood out to them? If so, is there a way for you to make sure those plot points stay relevant to the campaign? It's essentially a very simple yet effective way to find out which parts of the story are working on the players. Additionally, you can learn a lot from how they describe certain elements of the game and certain events that have transpired so far. For example, let's imagine you introduced an NPC that you expected the players to trust and rely on as an important quest giver going forward. If your players recap the previous session and describe that guy as that shifty motherfucker we know we can't trust, then you know that your introduction of that NPC did not go as planned. And now you can use that information to steer your game mastering in the next session. Are you going to find a way to make the players trust that character? Or are you going to steer into the curve and play him as untrustworthy going forward? Whatever you choose, you're reacting to the way your players remember interacting with him. Obviously, the downside of having your players recap sessions is that they don't necessarily know which parts of any given adventure are the important parts. It's possible they are going to misremember or entirely leave out some of the most critical information. And considering that the entire point of a recap is to catch everybody up on the relevant information for a new adventure, it's possible that having players deliver incomplete or inaccurate recaps can actually defeat the purpose of doing a recap at all. But this is obviously going to depend on your individual group. I've run campaigns where I will tell the players that they're responsible for the recap, and then someone in the party will keep a Google Doc open during the campaign and write down literally everything that happens. Sometimes they'll just read from this and summarize it at the beginning of the next session, whereas other groups might have that player type up a simplified recap and send it to everybody in between games. On the other hand, I've also been a part of some games where I can guarantee you that the players would not be the best people to recap the previous sessions, either because they don't really remember the things that happen in each game, or because they just weren't following it that well and are coming to really severely wrong conclusions anytime the GM sets up a plot twist. So you just know that their recaps would be kind of nonsense. It doesn't mean that they're not engaged with the game, it just means that they're not really keeping track of the story as well as you would like. They're enjoying it, but they're not lore masters. So this is ultimately going to depend a lot on your group. Personally, I just started running an in-person game for a lot of people who are new to the hobby, and I'm probably going to start doing my own recaps for those sessions, at least for a while. I'm looking forward to using those recaps as a way to essentially provide a clear line in the sand where we say, we are playing D&D now. Mystic Arts DM made a video about opening our games with rituals that help remind everybody that it is time to focus up and play the game. I think for that group, the recap will be a valuable part of establishing a clear ritual. If my Avatar game continues, I will also keep doing the recaps for myself because I can basically use those to help set the scene and immerse the players in the world, and also because it's a really fun homage to the show itself. On the other hand, my Curse of Strahd players know that they are responsible for those recaps. And yeah, it's been about a year since I've run my Strahd campaign, so when we do get back to the table, I know I'm going to need to do some sort of recap of my own to help get everybody back up to speed and bring them back into the game. But after that point, I will feel a lot more comfortable allowing my players to be responsible for the recaps themselves. Once the campaign resumes and the sessions are a lot more frequent anyway. There's one more major benefit for allowing the players to do the recaps themselves. It gives them the opportunities to make their own connections without you having to do that work for them. If they have to look back at all the events of all these previous sessions and remember what happened and find a way to communicate that information to their fellow players, then they might start putting some pieces together and they might figure out a pretty big plot twist. And speaking of which, Oddwick.
Yeah?
What happened to the masked man?
I don't know.
You cast a spell on him, right?
Yeah, just to knock him back, get him out of the room.
So you don't know where he is?
No?
Hey, Oddwick.
What?
I've been thinking. Maybe I should do a recap. Like the players doing recaps for a D&D game instead of the Dungeon Master doing it, maybe I can try my hand at recapping the stuff that led us to this point. Do you mind if I try that?
Be my guest.
Great.
Previously on Super Geek Mike.
Who the fuck are you?
I'm Oddwick, the algorithm wizard, and I'm here to help your channel grow. I won't be happy until you hit 100,000 subscribers.
But until we hit that goal, you're gonna be in more of my videos.
All of them!
Soon.
We had my kid's first birthday party. I had some car trouble and a lot of internet issues, and our clothes dryer literally burst into flames. There's gonna be a lot of Critical Role videos coming in the next few weeks.
Not this time.
So now that I'm through with a very chaotic March, we are finally coming back to the Demystified series.
I told you to delete your channel.
What are you saying?
I'm saying that I think you know exactly what happened to the Masked Man. I think you know who he is.
I don't.
He didn't show up until you came around, and he seems to be fixated on you.
What are you talking about?
Every time he's been watching the channel, you've been there.
So have you. And I wasn't here when he shot at you.
That's right, you weren't. You showed up and knocked him away and he disappeared, and then you convinced me to do a whole video about recapping our D&D games? You organized this. This was all you.
Okay, I will admit that this provided a really excellent opportunity for us to talk about this subject and get another video out there. That doesn't mean that I brought this guy here.
You said you just hit him with a spell to knock him back. The reason you don't want to hurt him is because he's your ally.
Mike, I swear, I don't know who he is. I don't know him.
So he came in and shot at me, and then you knocked him back, and he just didn't come back into the room for some reason?
Right.
So a guy with a laser gun is just loose in my house now, right?
The baby is sleeping. I had a whole plan, you know. When Oddwick knocked me back, I was gonna come around through the bathroom window, catch you by surprise, zap the computer, then just leave. But I thought I heard the baby stirring. I had to check on him. I didn't want to have to get this close. I thought those messages might scare you, get you to delete your channel. When that didn't work, I tried other methods. Your car, your dryer, your internet, anything I could think of. But you just wouldn't take the hints.
Who are you?
I never meant to get this close, but I just wanted to see him again.
Who are you? I told you to delete your channel. You should have listened. I won't let you make the same mistakes again. I'll be in touch. You're okay, you're okay. You're okay. You're okay, you're okay. Shh, go back to sleep.